April 18, 1942, 8:15 a.m. The deck of USS Hornet, 650 nautical miles east of Tokyo. The North Pacific wind cuts across the flight deck like a blade, whipping salt spray against the 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers lashed to the carrier's surface. Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle stands near the bow, his leather flight jacket snapping in the gale, watching whitecaps roll across an angry gray sea. The Hornet pitches forward, her deck rising and falling in sickening swells that make the impossible mission ahead seem even more suicidal. Behind him, 80 young aviators, most barely out of their 20s, perform final checks on aircraft never designed to launch from a carrier deck. The B-25s are medium bombers, twin-engine beasts meant for runways measured in thousands of feet, not the 467 feet of pitching deck they'll have mere seconds to clear before plunging into the Pacific. Doolittle knows what every man aboard knows but won't say aloud. This is a one-way ticket. The mathematics are brutal and unyielding. Fuel calculations show they'll never make it back to the Hornet. The plan, such as it is, calls for them to bomb Tokyo and 4 other Japanese cities, then fly west toward China, hoping to reach friendly airfields before their tanks run dry. It's desperation wrapped in bravado, a middle finger raised at an empire that 4 months ago shattered America's Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. 4 months. That's how long Japan has been winning this war with a speed and ferocity that stunned the world. December 7, 1941, the date seared into American consciousness, was merely the opening act. Within weeks, the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army swept across the Pacific like a tsunami. Hong Kong fell on Christmas Day. Manila collapsed on January 2nd. The Dutch East Indies, with its precious oil fields, surrendered in early March. Singapore, Britain's impregnable fortress, capitulated on February 15th in what Churchill called the worst disaster in British military history. Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines, each fell like dominoes before the Japanese advance. By April 1942, the rising sun flies over an empire stretching from the borders of India to the Marshall Islands, from the Aleutians to the edge of Australia. Japan controls resources, rubber, oil, tin, rice, that make her self-sufficient and seemingly unstoppable. In Tokyo, military planners speak openly of dictating peace terms to a defeated America. The home islands themselves remain untouched by war, an ocean of safety separating Japanese civilians from the conflict their military prosecutes with ruthless efficiency. But aboard the USS Hornet, Admiral William "Bull" Halsey knows something Tokyo doesn't yet understand. America isn't beaten, merely bloodied. The carrier task force, Hornet and Enterprise with their escorts, represents everything the U.S. Navy can scrape together for offensive operations in the Pacific. It's a gamble born of necessity and national morale that teeters on the edge of collapse. In Washington, President Franklin Roosevelt demanded action, any action, to strike back at Japan and prove to Americans that their military could hit the enemy. The idea seemed mad. Load Army bombers onto a Navy carrier, sail within striking distance of Japan's heavily defended coast, launch the aircraft knowing they can't return, and hope they reach China before crashing. The plan violates every principle of military prudence. It risks 2 of America's few remaining carriers for minimal military gain. But war isn't always about military gain measured in tons of bombs or casualties inflicted. Sometimes it's about will, about proving you're still in the fight. Admiral Isaraku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, understands this better than most of his colleagues. From his flagship Yamato, the most powerful battleship ever built, Yamamoto presides over Japan's stunning victories with a growing sense of unease that his peers mistake for excessive caution. Yamamoto spent years in America, walked her streets, studied at Harvard, served as a naval attaché in Washington. He knows what his superiors in Tokyo don't want to hear. America's industrial capacity dwarfs Japan's. The sleeping giant they awakened at Pearl Harbor will eventually bury them in steel and fire if the war drags on. Japan's only hope, Yamamoto argued before the war, was a knockout blow so devastating that America would sue for peace. Pearl Harbor was supposed to be that blow, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet and buying Japan time to consolidate her conquests into an impregnable defensive perimeter. Instead, Pearl Harbor missed the carriers, the very weapons that now define naval warfare. Worse, it united America in righteous fury rather than breaking her will. Yamamoto's worst fears are materializing. A long war of attrition that Japan cannot win. But in April 1942, with victory following victory and Japanese forces seemingly invincible, few in Tokyo share his pessimism. The propaganda machine churns out stories of divine destiny, of Japan's rightful place as Asia's liberator from Western imperialism. Citizens celebrate each conquest with lantern parades and sake toasts. The home islands remain serene, untouched sanctuaries where children play and factories hum without fear of bombs. The emperor himself, regarded as divine, resides in Tokyo's imperial palace in perfect safety. The very idea that American bombers might appear over Japan seems as absurd as snow in August. Doolittle checks his watch. 8:20 a.m. The mission is running ahead of schedule because Japanese picket boats spotted the task force earlier than planned, forcing an early launch 170 nautical miles farther from Japan than intended. Those miles mean even slimmer chances of reaching China. He walks toward his B-25, tail number 40 to 2344, designated aircraft #1. His crew, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and gunner, wait beside the bomber, their faces pale in the gray morning light. The deck pitches violently. Salt spray drenches the flight crews. Doolittle climbs aboard, settling into the left seat. Through the windscreen, he watches sailors scramble across the wet deck, pulling chocks from wheels, signaling the launch officer. The Hornet turns into the wind, her engines straining to add precious knots to the effective deck length. This is the moment. 16 bombers, 80 men. A target 650 miles away that doesn't believe they're coming. Doolittle advances the throttles, feeling the right R-2600 engines roar to life. The bomber strains against its brakes like a leashed animal. The launch officer's flag drops. Doolittle releases the brakes. The B-25 lurches forward, gathering speed across the pitching deck as the ocean rushes up to meet them. The B-25 clears the bow with feet to spare, dropping toward the waves before Doolittle muscles it into a climb. The engines scream, clawing for altitude as the gray Pacific falls away beneath them. Behind him, 15 more bombers launch at intervals, each one a separate gamble with death. Some nearly clip the water before finding lift. Others wobble in the crosswind, fighting for control. But within 30 minutes, all 16 are airborne, forming up in loose pairs before turning west toward Japan. They fly at wave-top height, beneath Japanese radar coverage, navigation dependent on dead reckoning and prayers. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, hostile, indifferent, ready to swallow anyone who falters. Doolittle holds his course, checking fuel consumption every few minutes with the growing certainty that even China may be beyond reach now. The early launch burned through their margin of error. At 12:30 p.m., the coast of Japan materializes through the haze. Doolittle climbs to 1,500 feet, enough altitude to clear obstacles, but low enough to complicate anti-aircraft tracking. Below, the Japanese countryside spreads out in patchwork fields and villages, utterly peaceful, utterly unprepared. No air raid sirens wail. No fighters scramble to intercept. A few civilians look up, waving at what they assume are Japanese aircraft on training flights. Tokyo appears at 12:45 p.m., sprawling and vulnerable beneath clear afternoon skies. Doolittle's bombardier, Sergeant Fred Bremer, hunches over his Norden bomb site, acquiring targets. Industrial facilities, oil refineries, steel mills. The bomb bay doors open. Anti-aircraft fire begins, confused, sporadic, wildly inaccurate. The Japanese gunners are firing at aircraft they never imagined they'd see, trying to track targets that shouldn't exist over the Emperor's capital. 4 500-pound bombs drop away from Doolittle's Mitchell, falling toward the Kanto region's industrial heart. The B-25 banks hard, diving back toward wave-top altitude as explosions blossom behind them. Doolittle doesn't look back. He's already calculating the fuel burn for the 1,200-mile flight to China, knowing the mathematics offer no comfort. Behind him, the other 15 bombers spread across Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, Japan's industrial core. The bombs they carry aren't enough to cripple Japan's war machine. 50 tons of ordnance across 5 cities amounts to a pinprick compared to what America will eventually deliver. But physical destruction isn't the point. In Tokyo, confusion turns to panic. Air raid sirens that have never sounded in anger now wail across the capital. Citizens who moments ago waved at the aircraft now run for cover as explosions echo through neighborhoods. Smoke rises from factories and dockyards. For the first time since Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in 1853, foreign power has violated Japanese soil through military force. The psychological impact is seismic. The Imperial Palace compound remains untouched. Doolittle's crews have strict orders to avoid it. But the very fact that American bombers flew over Emperor Hirohito's residence shatters the mythology of divine protection. If the emperor himself isn't safe, no one is safe. The invincibility that Japan projected across her Pacific empire evaporates in the smoke over Tokyo. Japanese fighters eventually scramble, but they're hunting shadows. The B-25s are already racing westward at wave-top height, burning fuel at rates that make reaching China increasingly theoretical. Doolittle's navigator, Lieutenant Henry Potter, traces their position on charts already soaked with sweat and anxiety. The fuel gauges show tanks running dry faster than calculated. At 9 p.m., 13 hours after launching from the Hornet, Doolittle's bomber crosses China's coast in complete darkness. They've made it this far on fumes and luck, but the auxiliary fuel tanks are empty, the main tanks showing nothing. The airfield they're supposed to reach is somewhere in the blackness below, but weather has closed in thick clouds, zero visibility, no radio beacons to guide them. Doolittle faces the decision every crew must make: crash land in darkness or bail out and hope for the best. He orders the crew to jump. One by one, they disappear into the night. Doolittle goes last, tumbling through darkness until his parachute deploys. He hits the ground hard in a rice paddy, soaked and alone but alive. Of the 80 raiders, 69 will eventually reach safety with help from Chinese civilians and guerrillas. 8 are captured by Japanese forces in China. 3 are executed. 1 dies in captivity. 2 crews land in Soviet territory and are interned. 11 men die in crashes or during bailouts. The military results of the Doolittle raid are negligible. The damage to Japanese industry amounts to minor disruptions quickly repaired. Not a single strategic target is permanently knocked out. By conventional military metrics, the raid achieves almost nothing. But in Tokyo, the impact reverberates through the halls of power like an earthquake. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo convenes emergency meetings with military leaders. How did American bombers reach Tokyo? Where did they come from? Could they come again? The questions expose a vulnerability Japan's leadership believed didn't exist. The Navy, responsible for defending the home islands, faces withering criticism for allowing enemy aircraft to strike the heart of the empire. Admiral Yamamoto sits in his cabin aboard the Yamato, studying intelligence reports with growing alarm. His staff has determined the bombers must have launched from carriers, an unprecedented operation that reveals American capability and determination his colleagues underestimated. The psychological effect on Japanese civilians, who believed themselves immune to war's hardships, troubles him deeply. More concerning is the political pressure now bearing down on the combined fleet to ensure such humiliation never happens again. The raid validates Yamamoto's pre-war warnings about America's resolve and resourcefulness. The country he studied and came to respect isn't seeking peace after Pearl Harbor. It's mobilizing for total war. But rather than prompting Japan to reassess its strategy, the Doolittle raid triggers a defensive overreaction that will prove catastrophic. Yamamoto faces demands from Tokyo to extend Japan's defensive perimeter eastward to eliminate the carrier threat before another raid can be mounted. His plan, already in development, to lure the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a decisive battle gains urgent approval. The target, Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of coral 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. Seize Midway. destroy the American carriers when they respond, and Japan will finally achieve the knockout blow that eluded them at Pearl Harbor. The operation is rushed forward, scheduled for early June, barely 6 weeks away. Yamamoto's staff protests that preparations are incomplete, that intelligence on American carrier positions is fragmentary, that the plan is too complex with too many moving parts. But Tokyo wants action, wants revenge for the humiliation of American bombs falling on the emperor's capital. In Washington, news of the Doolittle raid electrifies a nation desperate for good news. President Roosevelt, asked by reporters where the bombers came from, smiles and says only Shangri-La, the mythical paradise from James Hilton's novel. The mystery adds to the achievement. America can strike back. America is in the fight. Doolittle, who expected court-martial for losing all 16 aircraft, instead receives the Medal of Honor and promotion to brigadier general. But the raid's true impact unfolds in the decisions made in its aftermath. Japan, stung and humiliated, commits to Yamamoto's Midway operation with insufficient preparation and overconfidence born from 6 months of unbroken victory. The Americans, their codebreakers, having partially cracked Japanese naval communications, know Midway is the target and begin positioning their carriers for an ambush. June 4, 1942, 10:22 a.m. 14,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, northwest of Midway Atoll. Lieutenant Commander Wade M. C. Kluski, leading Enterprise's dive bomber squadron, peers through the plexiglass canopy of his SBD Dauntless, fuel gauge showing dangerously low reserves. For the past hour, he's been searching empty ocean where Japanese carriers should be, his squadron burning fuel they'll need to return to the Enterprise. The intelligence said the Japanese fleet would be here, but there's nothing, just endless blue water and growing dread that they've missed their chance. Then M.C. Kluski spots it. A lone Japanese destroyer racing northeast, its white wake cutting across the sea like an arrow. The ship is moving too fast, with too much purpose, to be on routine patrol. M.C. Kluski makes the split-second decision that will change the war. He follows the destroyer's heading. 7 minutes later, the full might of the Kido Butai, Japan's elite carrier strike force, materializes below him. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the same carriers that devastated Pearl Harbor, the same carriers that terrorized the Pacific for 6 months. They are arranged in a box formation, recovering aircraft from their strike on Midway, their flight decks crowded with planes being refueled and rearmed. Fuel hoses snake across wooden decks. Ordnance carts laden with bombs and torpedoes cluster near aircraft. It's a scene of organized chaos and maximum vulnerability. M.C. Kluski doesn't hesitate. He pushes his stick forward, diving toward the Kaga. Behind him, 33 Dauntless dive bombers follow, screaming down through 14,000 feet of sky at speeds approaching 250 knots. The Japanese, focused on recovering their Midway strike aircraft and preparing for what they believe will be attacks on American carriers located far to the east, don't see them coming until it's too late. The anti-aircraft fire starts, scattered, desperate, ineffective against aircraft diving nearly vertically. M.C. Kluski releases his 1,000-pound bomb at 1,500 feet, pulling up so hard that gravity crushes him into his seat. The bomb strikes Kaga's flight deck amidships, penetrating to the hangar deck where it detonates among fueled and armed aircraft. Secondary explosions ripple through the carrier as aviation fuel ignites and ordnance cooks off. Simultaneously, another squadron from Enterprise hits the Akagi, Yamamoto's flagship carrier. A bomb strikes near the midship elevator, blowing it into the air and sending burning fuel cascading into the hangar deck. Within minutes, Akagi is a floating inferno, her damage control teams overwhelmed by fires they cannot contain. A third squadron from Yorktown attacks the Soryu, landing 3 direct hits that turn the carrier into a blazing wreck. In 6 minutes, from 10:22 to 10:28 a.m., 3 of Japan's 4 carriers are mortally wounded, transformed from instruments of conquest into funeral pyres. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, manages to launch strikes that cripple the Yorktown, but American dive bombers find her that afternoon. By sunset on June 4th, all 4 Japanese carriers are sinking or dead in the water. taking with them irreplaceable pilots, aircraft, and the momentum that carried Japan to 6 months of victory. Aboard the cruiser Nagara, having transferred his flag from the burning Akagi, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commander of the carrier strike force, stares at the smoke columns rising from his fleet with the stunned incomprehension of a man watching his world collapse. 4 carriers. On. The Kido Butai, which sailed from Japan with the arrogant certainty of another easy victory, is destroyed. Yamamoto, monitoring the battle from the Yamato 300 miles to the northwest, receives the catastrophic reports in silence. His staff officers stand frozen, unable to process the magnitude of the disaster. The operation he designed to eliminate the American carrier threat and avenge the Doolittle raid has instead resulted in Japan's first major naval defeat in centuries. More devastating, Japan's shipyards cannot replace these carriers for years. The pilots, veterans who trained for a decade, cannot be replaced at all. The Battle of Midway becomes the hinge upon which the Pacific War turns. Japan's offensive capability is broken. The strategic initiative passes to America, never to return. But Midway doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's the direct consequence of decisions made in the shocked aftermath of the Doolittle raid. Had Doolittle's bombers never reached Tokyo, had Japan's home islands remained inviolate, the rush to strike at Midway might never have occurred. Yamamoto might have had time to prepare properly, to wait for intelligence that was clearer, to ensure his complex operation had better coordination. The pressure from Tokyo to take immediate action, to restore face after the humiliation of American bombs over the capital, pushed the Midway operation forward with fatal haste. The psychological impact of the Doolittle raid, dismissed by some historians as militarily insignificant, created the conditions for Japan's strategic defeat. It shattered the myth of invulnerability that made Japanese leadership overconfident. It forced defensive reactions that stretched Japan's resources. Most critically, it demonstrated that America wasn't seeking negotiated peace, but total victory, no matter how long the road. By August 1942, 3 months after Midway, U.S. Marines land on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, beginning America's first major offensive operation in the Pacific. The battle for that jungle-choked island will rage for 6 months, leading both sides in a savage campaign of attrition. But unlike Japan, America can afford attrition. The industrial giant Yamamoto feared is awakening, and its production capacity is staggering. In 1942, American shipyards lay down keels for 24 Essex-class fleet carriers, each one larger and more capable than the carriers lost at Midway. By war's end, the U.S. Navy will commission 17 of them, along with dozens of smaller escort carriers. Japan, by contrast, will struggle to complete even a handful of carriers, hampered by resource shortages and shipyard capacity that never matched American scale. The air over Japan, pristine and safe when Doolittle's raiders struck in April 1942, will by 1945 be darkened by hundreds of B-29 superfortresses dropping incendiary bombs that transformed Japanese cities into firestorms. The pinprick raid that delivered 50 tons of bombs will be followed by raids delivering thousands of tons nightly. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Yokohama, the cities Doolittle's crews struck symbolically will be struck repeatedly, devastatingly, until Japan's industrial capacity is shattered and her civilian population decimated by fire. Yamamoto won't live to see the culmination of his fears. On April 18, 1943, exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid, American P-38 fighters intercept his transport aircraft over Bougainville based on decoded communications. The architect of Pearl Harbor, the admiral who understood America's potential and dreaded the long war he correctly predicted, dies when his plane crashes into the jungle. Doolittle survives the war, commanding the 8th Air Force in Europe, his bombers reducing German cities to rubble in a strategic bombing campaign that makes his Tokyo raid look like a firecracker by comparison. He retires as a lieutenant general, lauded as a hero, living to age 96, long enough to see the country he bombed become a democratic ally, its rebuilt cities testaments to both destruction and resilience. The 80 men who flew the April 1942 mission gather periodically for reunions, their numbers dwindling with each passing year. They share a bottle of cognac, vintage 1896, saved for their final toast. Each man has a silver goblet engraved with his name, displayed right side up if living, inverted when deceased. By 2019, only one goblet remains upright. Staff Sergeant David Thatcher, the last surviving raider, dies at age 103, closing the book on a mission that changed history. The lesson of the Doolittle Raid echoes across decades. Wars are fought as much in the minds of leaders and citizens as on battlefields. Japan's military might in April 1942 was formidable. Her armies controlled vast territories. Her navy dominated Pacific waters. But the appearance of American bombers over Tokyo, impossible though it seemed, shattered the psychological foundations of Japanese strategy. It revealed that America wouldn't be deterred by early defeats, wouldn't seek negotiated peace, wouldn't stop until victory was complete. 16 bombers, 80 men, 50 tons of bombs, negligible military damage. And yet, in the grand accounting of World War II, the Doolittle Raid stands as a pivotal moment, not for what it destroyed in Tokyo, but for what it triggered in the minds of Japanese leadership. The raid exposed vulnerabilities that couldn't be ignored, forced reactions that proved catastrophic, and signaled to friend and foe alike that America was only beginning to fight. The war would rage for 3 more years, consuming millions of lives across the Pacific. But on that April morning in 1942, when Jimmy Doolittle's B-25 roared off the Hornet's deck into an uncertain sky, the trajectory of the conflict began its inexorable shift. Japan had won the early battles. America would win the war. If you found this deep dive into the Doolittle Raid and its strategic consequences compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth World War II history. The stories of courage, strategy, and the turning points that shaped our world deserve to be remembered and understood. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next historical exploration.